Mike McCool here in the Royal Examiner studio, and with me today is Colleen Snyder. She is a local author. She has written this book. Here's a nice picture. Mark can get a picture of it. In Search of Giants.
In Search of Giants.
So, Colleen, tell us how you got started in this.
Well, this book is really about how I found myself searching for the genetic giants of Northern Ireland. That's the subtitle of the book. And it's really about the stories and the people that I found along the way and who guided me in this journey. So that's really what the book is about generally. And usually when I start talking about the book, I always like to start with it's in Northern Ireland or the north of Ireland.
Okay.
Because most people don't really know what that means as far as images that should pop into your head when you think of that. Because when you think of Ireland, you think of the entire island of Ireland.
Right.
And of course, being Irish American, I was born Mary Colleen, 12 years of Catholic school. So, basically,
Irish, yes.
I got some Irish in me. And
I went over to Ireland and I went going through customs and they told me I spell my name wrong.
I have that. I was going to talk about that. I was going to talk about that McCool part of this. And so, anyway, usually people think of shamrocks, leprechauns.
Sure, we think of little people.
Emerald green. Well, the north of Ireland is very different, and especially in Northern Ireland, which is the 6 counties in Northern Ireland that were partitioned and remained as part of the United Kingdom.
Right.
So there, the folklore and the legends are very different. They are of giants and of of landmarks that are big, like Giant's Causeway. And also, they've got wonderful, large, big things. It's red. It's the Red Hand of Ulster, which is one of my favorite legends. And it's 2 warrior kings are fighting over a land and in their boats, and they come to an agreement that we will race till we get to land. And whoever gets to the land first and touches the land, they will be the leader of that land. They'll rule. So they get in their boats and they paddle away, and they're getting closer and closer. And the one guy that's losing, he looks up, he chops off his hand, and he throws it onto the land. Yeah. And it's the Red Hand of Ulster. He claims it because he was the one that touched it first.
That's kind of a loophole, isn't it?
It's a little bit of a loophole, And what's so wonderful too about the North is when I started doing my research more and more about it, is its tourism slogan is embrace the giant spirit.
There you go.
So it really talks about that. And so the other one of the legends that I wanted to talk about fits with you, with your name, McCool, is the big guy, the big legend in the north of Ireland is Finn McCool.
Finn McCool. Everybody's heard of Finn McCool.
Yeah, everyone's heard of Finn McCool and his Giant's Causeway, which he created. Because he was fighting Benandonner, who was the giant that was his sort of mortal enemy who lived in Scotland. And also that Finn McCool is known for having scooped up when he was fighting. He was throwing this massive, handful of dirt, and he flung it into the Irish Sea, which created the Isle of Man, and then he left behind the void, which is Loch Ness. And so, so that area right there, which is only about the size of Connecticut, and I'll just add that Finn McCool, if he was alive, he probably lived about 2,500 years ago. But if he lived, we don't know. But anyway, when we're talking about that, we talk about this very narrow area is what I focused on in the book. And it's in this area the size of Connecticut, and which is all of Northern Ireland, and then a smaller area between Spirin Mountains and Loch Ness, which I mentioned. There's this area that's very well known to be the land of giants. They have lots of place names that are giants. In fact, there's a website you can go to called Place Names, .ie, and if you go there, you can do searches, which I did. I did a search. I put in giants and or giant to see, because I'd heard there were giants' graves and things like that, or landmarks. It could be a giant seat or a giant hill or something. Well, what was so interesting is what popped up is there were about, I think it was 48 giants' graves that showed up for all of Ireland. 22 of those giants' graves are in that very tight area between the Spirin Mountains and the.
So what were they classifying giants? What kind of size were they? They didn't really say. Just big, huh?
Yeah, you just don't know,
Like
so
in biblical terms, they talk about giants. We don't really. They don't say how big they are.
We don't say how big they are.
But they're
and certainly when you think of giants, is you start to think of Goliath,
Sure,
clearly
sure.
out of the Bible. You also think of people that are just big, like Shaq O'Neal.
Sure.
Okay, that he's tall, he's big, he's a giant.
Big, he wears size 20 something shoes.
Yeah, exactly. And this book really is about genetic giants. So you're talking about a medical condition.
And this is something that we see today. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, then the question goes to, how did you come to write this story?
Well,
Okay.
why did you do this?
Why did I do this? Why did I decide to explore the land of giants? Well, I'm going to take you back to 2020 and those boring days in the pandemic, during the pandemic, and also something about my past. Okay, I told you about being Irish American. Well, when I was quite young, when I was 8 years old, I didn't know it at the time because I wasn't diagnosed until I was 20. I had a pituitary tumor. Now, if you know anything about the pituitary gland, it governs all your
everything.
glands.
You've got your growth hormones.
It's growth hormone. It's thyroid. It's anything to do with hormones in your body somehow is implicated in the pituitary gland, which is right in the center of your head. Very small, very powerful. And so I was diagnosed when I was 20, and I had a really tough time. So you can imagine in between those years, it's a long time to not be diagnosed.
Sure.
And it was right during my adolescence. And so I had a lot of damage to my skeleton. I was losing my vision. I strongly remember splitting headaches and, just complete disruption. In addition, I was 6 feet tall at the time. Okay,
You were head and shoulder over everyone else, right?
Yeah, I was quite tall.
Yeah.
I was quite tall. Now, you look at me now and you're like, wait a minute, you're awfully short for being a giant. Or and I'm like, well, because, puberty limits your growth, and I had started going through puberty so early. Now, somebody that doesn't go through puberty, like my co-author, Brendan Holland, is he didn't go through puberty till after he had his tumor treated.
Right.
But anyway, he is quite tall. I think he was 6'10" at his tallest, and he's still quite tall man. But anyway, so I was curious through time, I would go in and talk to people. Oh, it's very rare. Childhood, pituitary tumor is very rare. Doctors didn't even know what it was,
Sure.
They called it childhood acromegaly, which acromegaly and gigantism can be, terms that people use kind of loosely together. They have specific criteria for each. But, I never could get any information, and I never met anybody. It was very lonely. I mean, I always wanted, people want to reach out, especially now that you have the computers.
Sure.
And
the internet, literally the worldwide, right?
Oh my gosh, and Dr. Google, how many of us?
He's really famous.
Oh, Dr. Google. And so, all those years, so every once in a while we check in with Dr. Google. Well, one afternoon I checked in with Dr. Google, and I typed this in, and up pops a research paper that had been done in 2011. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine by a woman named Professor Marta Corbinitz. And she is a researcher in London, affiliated with St. Bartholomew's Hospital, which is a very well-known hospital. It has a 900-year history in London. And she had studied genetic gigantism in this particular area. And so I wasn't really sure, because my mother had told me my people came from Cork, which is a common thing for people to be told because that's where the ships go out.
Sure.
And if somebody had come there, come through there to go to the United States, they might say, I'm from Cork, and they would put them down as being in Cork, even though they could have come from the north, And so anyway, she had done these studies on people there that had a genetic mutation. And the exact name of it is the ARG304 stop mutation. That's like its science name. And so anyway, but she also, even more interestingly, she had been able to obtain a specimen from a rather famous 18th century giant who is in a museum in London called the Hunterian Museum. And there's quite a tale about Charles Byrne, which we can go into. But anyway, she had done this paleogenetics of getting his teeth, if you can imagine, especially when you learn his story. She had gotten his teeth and she had analyzed it. He had that mutation. He was from that area. And so I was like, this is really interesting, but I don't know. My people weren't from there. I don't know if this would fit me. So anyway, I kind of put it in the back of my mind. And the next day, talk about coincidence, and there's a lot of serendipity in this book. I was downstairs cleaning out some boxes in the basement, and I came across an envelope that I had, because I was looking for some pictures. My son, Mehmet, was about to get married, and his to-be wife, Christina, asked me for some family photos. I came across an envelope, and I was like, I don't remember this envelope. It's dated. My uncle died about 5 or 6 years ago, and it's dated quite some time ago. I opened it up, and he had sent me, and I completely forgot about, a complete genealogy. And in the genealogy, I pull it out, and I look, and there is John Robert McGurk, who at the age of 11 had come from this very area. Had come from Coal Island, which is about 10 miles from where Charles Byrne grew up. And then I would find out my co-author was now living. And so I thought, oh my gosh, how can this be? Then I go and I run upstairs and I look look at her paper again, and I realize that there's, to qualify for this genetic mutation, there's 3 things: connection to the area. Now I know I have it. You want to have some, childhood onset. Sure. That's another thing. And then the other thing is you want to have a relative, okay? Well, that was, that had it, okay? Because it's not sure that just because John Robert came from there that he had the condition. So you want to have another relative to show the connection, the genetic connection. So anyway, I look in the envelope and I realize there's all these photographs in there. So I pull out the photographs and I'm looking through, and out comes one that is, I was like, oh my gosh, look at this. This is the Catholic priest. Now, my mother, she died back in the 80s. So she had mentioned to me when I was going through my own diagnosis that she remembers this Catholic priest that was very tall, had big hands, big feet, died of diabetes and blind, which are 2 common side effects of having had a pituitary tumor. And he had the face. He had the look of somebody with it. And so I had the 3 criteria. So it was, by then, it was probably about 7 o'clock at night. It was later at night. And I looked on their 10-year-old paper plus, and I look on the paper, and I'm like, oh, here's her email. Maybe I'll email her. I would love to meet somebody that has this condition. I'm dying of curiosity.
Sure.
Right? Okay, so anyway, so I email her thinking I'm never going to make it past spam, stodgy British researcher, what are they going to think of me, right? So anyway, so off I fire it, and so I go about my business, and I come back later about 9 o'clock to check my email, which is 5 hours later in England, right?
Right.
Okay, and so it's like 2 a.m., and here's a message from Professor Corbinitz. And she says, I do think that you have this gene. And so, anyway, I was like flabbergasted to start with. And then, of course, dying of curiosity more of, could she connect me with someone? And so she said, I think there's someone I can connect you with. I'll get back to you. And what she did is she sent me the contact information for Brendan Holland.
Oh, there you go.
And so Brendan has lived his entire life in this area. He is deeply ingrained in this community, as well as is an historian. He started a local historical society there. So this is the man. He knows everybody. He knows everything. He is the one that when I met him, which we hit it off immediately, and that was a very emotional experience to meet him, because he called me on the phone in this wonderful Irish accent comes over the phone, and I had never met anybody, and I'm 68 now, so I would have been 65 then, and that's and he's roughly my age. He's a couple of years older, and when we started to compare our stories, they were very similar. We had both gotten diagnosed when we were 20. I had difficult adolescence because of the changes that happened, but we hit it off immediately, and so we kind of almost right away we sort of joined forces. Because I also found out that I was the first person in the United States identified with this mutation. So we were both like, I got to write about this.
And now when Dr. Google can quote you, right?
Yeah, exactly. So here I am, the first person with this genetic.
So is there a test that they can find out if you have this gene or?
Yes, you do the cheek swab. It's a classic DNA test, but it's
look at the chromosome and figure out what you're missing, right, or have extra.
Well, it's actually very specific to this one. You send the swab in, they test for this particular 304 mutation. And if you have this 304 mutation, this means that you are related to that person. Now, they could be a very distant cousin, because what's really interesting is another part of Professor Corbinitz's research was to try and figure out how old is this mutation.
Right.
And she needed it's way above my pay grade, this algorithm that's used by these computational researchers, mathematical researchers. But you figure out, depending on the people that you know that have the mutation currently, they can project into the past and try and understand how many generations did this go back, because they look at the actual mutation that they see in the DNA sample, and they're able to make inferences from that.
Right.
Okay. And so anyway, now this goes back to your friend Finn McCool. So how long ago was this mutation, like the founder, the first person to have
blame
this
it on the
mutation?
McCool. That's what they're going to do.
Well, it's 2,500 years ago. Okay, they estimate anywhere between 1,500 to 2,500 years ago. So, here we are back in the days
we're right back into it.
Finnian warriors and Finn McCool. So anyway, so that's basically...
Well, they'll blame it on the Vikings or somebody that, come on.
So that's basically the story.
So how is this passed down? I mean, does it skip generations? Does it have to have certain ones together in order for this to continue? They discovered that?
Yes, they actually did. This again goes back to Professor Corbinitz's research, because you want to know exactly, well, first of all, if I have the gene, okay, my kids have a 50-50 chance of getting it. Okay, so that's the first thing that she looked at. Okay, so now we know that if each one of my children individually, 50-50 chance.
Right.
Okay, but then what about how often someone's going to get it? Okay, they did research on that. Okay, so you get the gene. Now, is everybody going to get the disease? No.
Right.
Okay, so what they found out was that about 23% of the people that get the gene will actually develop the disease. They don't know why. For example, my 5'2" sister, okay, she is a carrier. Yeah. Okay, she has the gene, but she never developed.
She'll give it around, but she's going to share it, but she didn't.
Yeah, she actually did pass it on to one of her children, but then his children don't have it, so it kind of stops, you know. But and so she was able to determine that. They, like I say, they're doing research now on why do some people develop it and some people don't. But she also was able to look. They did a really interesting thing, and Brendan was very involved in this because he helped coordinate it at his home. At his home, because this was his community.
Sure.
They did a population screening, and that's another. There's so many fascinating bits and pieces of the story. But anyway, the population screening was. What they did is they brought in 15 endocrinologists. Okay, now imagine, that area, let's say Dungannon, is probably not much bigger than Front Royal. And what they did is they got these international researchers from Romania, Italy, England, Ireland, just all over, these different people to come in to do get specimens from people in the community, to analyze it, to see, okay, we're going to get a series of samples. Now we'll figure out how prevalent is it in this community. So the question was, how do you do this? And so Brendan basically came up with, along with Ronan McCloskey, and of course in consultation with Professor Corbinitz, they all put their heads together and decided that they would set up for 2 weekends in the parking lot of a Tesco. And a Tesco is roughly like Walmart.
Right.
Okay, so they set up porta-cabins, they call them, which are like little portable offices. Right. And they got people to come in. Yeah. And imagine going to Walmart. You're going in to get your shopping done. Yeah. And, hey, come over here. I'd like to get your DNA to find out if you're a giant, And so
then they start telling their friends and they all show up, right?
Well, the thing is, they got over the 4 days that they did it, in 2 days in each of these two towns, almost 1,000 samples.
Wow.
Yeah. And so anyway, so they determined that, yes, it is much more prevalent in that area.
Yeah. So you have a lot of stories in your book about people that you've run across through history?
Yes. This is very much a book of stories. I tell that to people. Is each one of the chapters is a different story. The first one is much more detail about my story.
Sure.
The second one is Brendan's story. Okay, so he talks about what it was like for him to grow up with it and what happened to him and how he was diagnosed. The third story is Charles Byrne. And so that one is really interesting because that is filled with body snatchers and resurrectionists and talks about Dr. John Hunter, who was an anatomist in Georgian England at the time. And then each one of the chapters after talks about a different person and what happened to them and how, it was really, I think that tied in with why it was so important for me to call this book In Search of Giants, because I was doing all this during the pandemic, and I'm searching through Zoom. I'm talking to all these different people, and Brendan was my guide. He was the one that introduced me to most of them. Professor Corbinitz also was very involved, and then I think I mentioned Dr. Lowry in Belfast was an endocrinologist that helped with all the science part of it. And so it really was, I'm the writer of it, but it was a collaborative book project.
Sure.
It really depended on Brendan's deep knowledge of the area, knowing the history, and pointing me in the right direction to get the stories that I included. And then Professor Corbinitz and especially Professor Corbinitz. I mean, she's a fascinating woman. I tell a little bit of her story in there. And then Dr. Lowry, who helped us. So anyway, but I'm still in search.
Well,
that's the thing.
You sound like you had a lot of fun. If nothing else, it kept you busy.
It was very interesting, and also I really signed on my website, In Search of Giants. I made it a .org, and the reason I decided to do that was I'm really still in search of giants. I'm really hoping that there's got to be other people knowing, in the United States, knowing the Irish diaspora.
Right.
They've got to be here. And
I can remember not too long ago we had someone come in the office. I know they have to duck down to get through the door, so I know they're pretty tall.
And so
there's a lot of, just because you're tall doesn't mean that you have this gene.
But if you ask that person, are your people from Northern Ireland? And they said yes, boy, I'd want to talk to them.
Yeah,
I would really like to talk to them. Yeah, and so that's what I'm hoping is that I can find those people, and that's the ultimate goal of this book, because it's not going to be a New York bestseller.
Well,
obviously,
you might be surprised. Once you're on the Royal Examiner,
I know.
So we're going to have book number 2, and that'll be In Search of More Giants.
In Search of 2.0 is what I'm hoping, because like you say, I've had an awful lot of fun. I went on book tour, which I can't even believe those words are coming out of my mouth, because I tell you, I had no thoughts of writing a book. I am a professional writer. I have done freelance writing. I taught at Lord Fairfax, now Laurel Ridge, and so I taught writing there. But this wasn't on my bingo card. This wasn't something I was going to do.
Well, they say everyone has a book or a novel in them.
Everyone does have a book in them,
and a story to tell. And you had a good excuse during the pandemic. It kind of like forced you to stay home more.
I know, and how could I not write about it?
I know.
When you as a videographer, doing it, how would you not do this? And so I very, strongly feel like it picked me in so many ways.
Well, everyone does have a story, and I tell people, even from your relatives, start collecting memories from people, and like in your case, my grandma's a giant,
I know.
And so there's stories that'll be passed down. Oral history through our generations to come, and our families are dying off, and we used to do that, and now with the age of so much information, we've kind of like, well, I'll get it later, I'll do it later. And I encourage people to sit down with your grandparents or even your parents and record conversations with them, and hey, what did you do as a kid, and find out things like that,
and do things like that,
stories you'd probably never heard.
You can learn about, and you never know where it's going to take you, which for me, like I talked about Charles Byrne, I wound up going and talking at the Hunterian Museum, which is where his skeleton was displayed, and also all the interviews and talking to people.
You never thought you'd ever do that.
I never thought I would do that, and one of the things, you're talking about having fun with it, one of the things I want to explore now that I'm not traveling to England, to the Hunterian Museum, and to an endocrine conference in Belfast, and then
you learned a lot of big words.
Oh my gosh, we did. We also did a major event in Dungannon, which is where Brendan Holland lives now, and he's very involved in the community. The Gaelic Football League, he's very involved with that, and there were 130 people that came to recognize his role in this and to see about the book. But one of the things I really was thinking about doing, and this goes back to your point of other people talking and interviewing, is that sound booth that they've put at the library now. That thing kind of in the back. I was like,
Studio 330, right?
Studio 330, and maybe doing some podcasts about other giants, other giant communities, because this particular mutation that I talked about, this particular 304 mutation, is linked to Northern Ireland, but there are other countries, for example, Finland, that also has a very strong tradition of giant folklore. Like
people have migrated as groups, and then it's just like here, certain people come from certain countries. They'll go to Minnesota or they'll go to Arizona. You know what I mean? And next thing, their families come. And next thing, you have a lot of intermixing there. And all of a sudden, now we got a group
over there, but also, which is true, which is part of what my search will be in the United States, because I want to go to Baltimore. If my ancestors came through Baltimore, that means other people from County Tyrone came through there.
Over the years in our history anyway, not so much now, but they go to places where they had relatives and family and like cultures.
Yes, because they was welcoming to them. They had support.
They could speak the language.
Right. But what I meant about Finland is they have a different genetic mutation that caused them to have a pituitary tumor, and they developed their own giant folklore.
Okay.
So they have kind of they're separate but the same. I mean, but the thing is so not only do I want to try and go to Baltimore and try and find others with this particular Northern Ireland 304 mutation, I want to go to Finland. There's another group
that's a world traveler.
I know there's another group that's down in Mexico, a similar thing where there's this area, strong tradition of giant folklore and legend, and has a particular genetic mutation that causes a pituitary tumor.
Be a specialist.
Yeah, one day we will see. So,
well, it sounds like you're having a lot of fun, Colleen.
I'm really enjoying it. Yeah,
we appreciate you coming in, sharing your story with us and your book. We're going to encourage people. Can we get this book locally here?
It's not in any of the local bookstores, but you can get it from me.
There you go.
Because that's why I brought.
We'll put an address on the website.
Yeah, this is and I also.
And I think I've seen this on Amazon.
This is on Amazon, and it's on Barnes and Noble. It's on any of the places that you normally go online for books.
It's a real book.
Well, I'm very proud of my jacketed hardcover. The design of it was a whole nother learning curve for me, is to get this design. I had never done design like this, but if you go to my website, there's ordering information if you want it signed. I created the shop, so if you buy from the shop, I'm the one that set up the shop, so if you have a problem, you can contact me. My contact information is on there, and then also I wanted to make sure to give a plug for the Laurel Ridge Community College Holiday Book Fair.
Okay.
And that's going to be on December 4th. From 4:30 to 7 p.m. It's a Wednesday, so kind of catch the after-work crowd to come over there and do some holiday shopping. The last time I looked on the website, I counted 36 authors. Will be there.
Are you going to be there?
I'm going to be there.
Oh,
and so I'm going to be there, so you can come out and support local writers, do some holiday shopping, get signed copies, because the authors will be there. It's every kind of book. I was looking to see if there was a particular genre, but there were inspirational, thriller, mystery, romance, fiction, nonfiction. Right. So
we've done a lot of conversations with local authors, and it's surprising how many are in our area. It's like musicians too. There's just a lot of talent in the valley, and it's just. Like they just kind of like migrated here, I guess.
I think so.
If you open your eyes, you can see all sorts of things.
Right, exactly. And I think what's wonderful that I've discovered because of working with this book, this is a self-published book. I formed a publishing company in order to publish it. Is that what's happening is in the publishing world right now is these big publishing companies are kind of gobbling up a lot of the smaller printing, the smaller presses. Right. And they're getting narrower and narrower in their focus. And so some of these more unusual topics, to me, more fascinating topics, are really going over to people that are finding ways to self-publish. And so I think that's also what's wonderful about these kinds of book fairs that you see where
Right.
authors come. They're selling their own books.
Yeah.
It's like people that you go to
Sure.
a band and you see the merch
Yeah,
table,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, their CDs
Yeah,
or whatever.
Yeah, I got a merch table.
Yeah, I got a merch table
Yeah,
here,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, is what I've got going. So,
Yeah, it's great.
But anyway, I think it's really good also to support these writers that are finding their voice and finding a way to get their story told without going through a traditional publisher that publishes such a tiny bit of
Well, they
what
say
is
they
out
publish
there.
over 500,000 books a year. Can you imagine that? It's just
Well, what's
amazing.
interesting, I read a New Yorker article and it said 70% of the books that are published by a traditional publishing house like
Right.
Simon & Schuster or somebody like that sell less than 1,000 copies.
Yes, I said somewhere
It's
I
not
read
very
that
many,
you
you
can get
know?
on the New York bestseller list with 5,000 copies sold.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, because they depend on the really big names
Yeah.
like Colleen Hoover, Stephen King, of course. You know,
Sure.
these people that crank out these
Sure.
books and have a dedicated fan base, and they know that they're going to sell thousands and thousands
Yeah.
of books. But there's so many other voices out there.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you coming in
Well, thank you
and
for
sharing
having
your
me.
book with
Yes,
us and
connect
and
with
your
me
story.
online.
We will. We're going to put your information out in the story. We'll give everyone an opportunity to go to your website, check it out. And again, that book fair is on December 4th at the
Laurel Ridge Community College. I think it's at the community center, but I'm
Okay.
sure they'll have signs
I'm
up
sure
to
they will,
guide
yeah.
you. Yeah.
I still call it Lord Fair.
I keep calling. That's
I
where I
know.
taught in the 90s,
know,
so it'll always be.
I know.
But,
Thanks again. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.